Hey everyone, Phreak here, and it's time for the next patch for League of Legends 10.12 is here, and it's pretty interesting. We got some cool Keystone, small-scale reworks, and otherwise some pretty interesting balance changes. Stuff I get to dive into a little bit. Should be pretty fun overall, so let's get into it. It is June. Enjoy playing League of Legends. I just got my Pulsefire Prestige Lucian yesterday, so if you don't, you either didn't buy the Battle Pass or you're playing less than me. Let that be a lesson to you. I am bad for what it's worth, but that's okay. Buffs you can see here to Akali, Brand, Senna as an AD carry, Viktor, Volibear, and Xayah, and nerfs slash some side grades to Cassiopeia, Fiddlesticks, Trundle, Varus, and Yasuo is also slash side grade. So let's talk about what's going on here. Akali is getting some flat damage added. 5 flat damage to her Q, as well as a 0.05 higher ability power ratio. Worth noting that Akali's Q does in fact have a total AD ratio. Also, she always buys Gunblade, but really, I mean, anytime you buy items, you're essentially raising the base damage, so Either way, this is actually a fairly big buff at level 1 of 8%. Scales down over time as she gains more ranks the ability, because 5 flat damage means less when it does 200 damage than when it does 100 damage. Duh. Down to like a 2% buff, which is not very big, but an 8% higher AP ratio build. Yes, Gunblade exists, which will add more to the early base damage. I believe Gunblade has 60 AD on it, or thereabouts. And with a 0.6-ish AD ratio, you're looking at 40-ish more base damage. But otherwise, the rest of her build is all in ability power, and that is an 8% return on investment, which is pretty good. So this is pretty substantial. As you can see here, I'm looking up her win rate according to Lolalytics in Plat Plus on this patch globally. Pretty standard 46%. Akali is really not seen in pro play, so it does seem like the fairly recent change to the kit that tried to get rid of her pro presence but make her more viable in solo queue. This champion has been gaining win rate while still not dominating pro, and so every like 3 patches they're going to give Akali another 1% win rate. This one arguably more than 1%. This could be, I would say, maybe even 1.5 to 2. 8-ish% damage on your primary damage tool is very big. Now I do want to point out, talking about the last video, that I thought the Tristana 3% attack speed was more important than the 6 to 3% more durability on other marksmen. That ended up not being true. Tristana was flat to, I believe, slightly negative off the previous patch. Now that was based off of fairly early public data. I didn't see internal tracking on that, and right now I don't have access to do that to check it myself. Otherwise, I would definitely look it up and tell you. But I was right that Lucian's win rate went down about 2%, which I think was about what I guessed. As a quick recap of the previous patch, the Marksman health buffs was about a 2% win rate buff, and Lucian was our dummy variable for basically measuring that, because Lucian's buffs were non-buffs. Like, he didn't even gain top lane win rate, right? Of course not, because top lane Lucian doesn't build crit, but like, even for bot lane Lucian, it was not a big deal regardless. And yeah, as it turns out, we were in a world where marksmen who weren't affected by the change went down about 2% win rate, as expected. So that was definitely very, very effective. So it was worth pointing out that 6 to 3% more health was worth about as much as 3-ish% more attack speed. And that's where we ended up. Anyway, Akali, again, I want to say this is probably a good 1.5 to 2% win rate bump as a sort of context setter. Next up, we have a buff to Brand, specifically farming Brand, aiming mostly at mid lane, of course, and it's really, really amplifying the mana restore he gets when killing minions who are already ablaze. So this means, if I understand correctly, as I play support Brand and not mid Brand, you have to hit them with the spell first, then kill them, and then that will give you the mana restore. Now this is a little awkward sometimes, because in order to get a big AoE clear, I mean, you can, with the right amount of ability power, do W then E, and then E will spread because they're all on fire, and you hit all 3 cast minions, and you get, 60 mana back or something, which is pretty good. The alternative is like you Q a minion, then you E it to spread, and then you W to light the whole thing up with bonus damage. That's a lot more unwieldy, and Rise does it better. I don't know how Brand would get himself there more easily. This is just kind of always going to be the difficulty of Brand. That said, Brand has been a like 53% win rate mid laner before. He just isn't anymore. over the changes to his kit over time. That's where he's ended up. So very substantial buff to his mana restore. He is this is the lowest rate I've ever seen mid-brand be at. This is actually fairly shocking, but this is where he is. Either way, a substantial gain to his mana restore. Now, my understanding is that this mana restore does not scale linearly. It's like stepped every few levels, but ultimately, because I wasn't completely confident that the new scaling was going to be non-linear as well, I just put them both as linear and said, look, it's close enough because it is. Some of these numbers are not specifically accurate, but the directionality and like the level 1 and 18 numbers are the same, and everything's in the middle regardless. So yeah, double to triple the mana back on the spells. And I want to point out that like 6 mana back per kill is pretty useless, but 20 mana back per kill is actually not garbage. Again, where if you're using W then E to kill a backline, that is 60 mana on the combo instead of 18 mana on the combo. It pays for the E in that case. This is absolutely a very relevant buff. This should be really useful for his ability to sustain his wave clear. And it's worth pointing out that Brand really wants to go Riley's Leandries as fast as possible and doesn't necessarily want to have to rush Ludens. Anytime you are not forced to buy mana items, and I want to point out, like, Ludens is not that efficient of an item. Like, you are spending a lot on the mana restore and honestly, not that good magic damage bounce. Like, it's not bad. It's good for wave clear, but it's not that strong. Especially when, again, you really want Riley's Leandries on as soon as possible, and that takes some time. So we can definitely see Brand get to change his item build around, which will take some time to percolate, and like will take some time for players to learn what the correct build is. But this is the kind of change that will shift builds. And this is a pretty big deal. I don't think Brand hits 50% win rate. This is not a 3% win rate buff, but this is definitely meaningful, and I would say probably good 1.5% at least. We then go to Cassiopeia, who, as one of the champions that is played in multiple roles, I looked up her per role win rate. Sorry about that. As Cassiopeia was not an absurdly popular champion, the sample is a little limited in some of her off roles. Her most common role is still mid by far, but has some top lane and a decent amount of bot lane play. So she's losing 15 flat health. She's losing 2 flat armor and gaining 4 flat magic resist, right? So it seems that the idea is to try to push her away, make her weaker in primarily physical damage lanes, and make her about as strong or stronger or almost as strong, right? It depends on the math here, which I did, in primarily magic damage lanes. What this means is trying to get Cassiopeia to remain good in mid lane and be worse in top and bot, so that when, top lane, let's say Aurelia comes after her, well, Aurelia can more likely win the all-in. So, and such, make Cassiopeia a weaker champion in the matchup. Or when Lucian and Nautilus go for an all-in down here, or Varus goes for Q-poke or whatever, Cassiopeia is less, poised to withstand this. But when she's mid-laning against Orianna, she's going to be just as fine. And that's where the numbers line up. Kudos to the designer for doing a pretty good job at getting the numbers here. So 15% flat health is this. Obviously, it means more in the early game, 3% in the early game, 1% in the late game. Not massive. This is a champion who also, by the way, like tends to build Rod of Ages and Riley's and Leandries and things like that. Like, she tends to stack health, which is interesting because Cassiopeia actually has fairly decent health, like a fairly decent health pool, right? Like, going at 2100 by 18 is pretty good for a ranged champion. So it didn't necessarily need to buy health. She actually wanted to buy armor and MR by the late game, but the items that she builds are the items that she builds, right? Then we look at what it means when we change her armor and MR values. Now, this, I want to point out, is with all the health stacked in as well, by the way. This is her health multiplied, the new health times the new armor divided by the old health divided by the old armor. So here is, right, 2 less armor, but considering the health difference as well, right, this kind of armor change would be about 2 health, or about 2% rather. But 2%, multiplied against another 3% health loss puts you at, more like 4 to 5% health loss, right? So she is fairly flatly 2 to 4% less durable against physical. Now, it's not massive, right? It's not massive, but one of the nice things about armor changes is that it's fairly resilient to stat buys. Even if she had 100 armor, this would still be a 1% drop, right? Like, her armor total quadruples and the percentage only halves. Whereas you can see the health total quadruples and it goes from 3 to 1%, right? Armor and MR changes tend to withstand game time, whereas health changes don't unless you're nerfing health scaling as well. So you're going to continue to feel this a decent amount. It's not huge, right? It is a nudge. It is, a 1%. To be fair, right? Let's keep in mind, right? When Marksman got 6 to 3% more health, they gained 2% win rate roughly. When a Cassiopeia bot lane loses 2 to 4% less health against physical damage, which is okay, not all damage types and not as big of a change, it's going to be obviously a bit diminished. So this is maybe a 1% win rate drop to this lane as a result. Like being roughly half as impactful, I think is a fair way to put this. I think, yeah. And then, of course, here, just next to it, of course, here's the magic damage version of it. And it is 4 magic resist gained to try to compensate for the 3 to 1% durability drop via health. And you can see that, yeah, it just barely compensates. I checked the extra decimals. It is above 100%. It's just good enough at level 1 that if you are taking only spell damage, like you're playing against Xayah, you are technically more durable. And as time goes on, it's even better. Now, I want to point out again that MR is generally, if you're against somehow mystically only magic damage, MR is generally better than health. Like when the numbers look like this, because it modifies your health regeneration, right? When you take an Arcana Pulse twice per lane, the Arcana Pulse does less damage, but your flat health regen recoups the same 35 HP. So instead of taking 110 from Arcana Pulse, you took 108, but you still gained 35 health back, which now puts you in a better spot than you were before, right? Compared to just, here's some flat health that then got taken back away. Because it multiplies health regen, it's useful there. Also, it multiplies, again, your flat health purchases. So when you're going Ryle's and Leandri's and Seraph's Shield and things like that, all of those benefit from having defensive stats like armor and magic resist. So again, when her primary threat is magic damage, this is very, very good. When her primary threat is physical damage, this is really hurtful. Again, she builds a lot of health, so this will, retain its like 2% win rate drop or 2% durability drop. Long story short, yeah, this is going to keep Cassiopeia equal/positive in mid. Also, as one last thing I want to point out real quick is, against generic damage, what happens, right? Well, against generic damage, she is weaker, and maybe about here, she's like maybe slightly stronger. Like once you're kind of into the late game, 2 armor means less than 4 MR, and the health difference is small enough that it's not a big deal anymore. Probably, around this point in time, maybe more like this. Yeah, probably more like this or here. She is generically more durable. I didn't do a data table for assuming you have like equal damage coming in from both damage types. What's it look like now? That could have been done. Again, my instinct is it's going to be around like 13 plus, maybe a bit later. But it means that she is generically frailer in the entire early game. Even in magic damage matchups, she does take physical damage from things like minions. Turrets can hit her, whatnot. Counterpicking her with something like Talon, because this champion has 18 base armor, certainly possible. And again, you look at her win rates, actually to bring it up in the first place, but it was on screen the whole time. Very, very high win rate top and bot, solid win rate mid lane. Didn't need to gain 4 MR, but it's fine. I think they didn't want to like lower her win rate by too much overall, which is okay with me. But yeah, there should be, I would say, again, about a 1% win rate drop in top and bot lane. Maybe it's actually more than that, but basing it off of the Marksman win rate difference, this is where I'm kind of pegging the win rate difference at. But yeah, I think, and this is a cool change, right? I think this is directionally really, really cool. I think it's really interesting. It is now, I think, maybe the 8th or so champion that has non-standard MR. To say, you know what, yeah, we're going to shape this champion away from certain lanes and shape them into certain lanes by tweaking their base stats. And I think there's actually a lot of benefit in League of Legends to having, bot lane be 90% physical damage and top lane be 80% physical damage and mid lane be 90% magic damage. Probably less than that because Talon and Yasuo are pretty popular. 75% magic damage. I think that's actually good because it allows for tools like this. It allows you for lovers to say, well, okay, this champ is going to be really skewed towards magic. And thankfully, we know what that's going to mean for matchups because she tends to, fight these matchups in these various lanes. I'm a fan of that. I think it's actually a good thing. I'm totally fine with Kennen and Vladimir and Rumble being top laners, but there's way more fighters than there are mages, and I like that. I think it's actually a good thing. I am a fan of that being what's going on. So I like that existing. Cool. All right, let's move on to the next thing. And yeah, I think we're good. Like I could do like a ramble on base stats overall, but I think we're good for this one. All right, next up, Fiddlesticks, getting half of the buff from the previous patch walked back. It was a really big deal, so now it's just a full half damage to minions. This is a buff of, a nerf of 1/6, so 17%. Minion damage, which also, by the way, influences the sustain. It is, right, the heal is based on actual damage dealt, and here you are. Okay, Senna. That's a nice bug fix. If you want to build crit on Senna, it'll reduce her attack windup. Great, good stuff. Always fantasying bug fixes like that. And overall, 5 times more Mist Wraiths drop when she is killing minions. So she is going to be maybe at some point a farming bot laner. I know the design goal for Senna was for her to be primarily a support. Right, go buy your Black Mist Scythe or whatever, and go farm it up. Well, don't farm it up. Go farm champions and be the dedicated support and get someone to support in your lane who's going to take all the gold. But, you know, 1/5 of her games can be as a carry marksman. You know, if people want to play the farming bot laner and do an okay job as Senna and just support someone else, that should be allowed and that should be fine. And I'm a fan of that, right? Her primary role is support. Don't make it unpickable because it's trolling to not play her as the AD carry. But hey, let's let it be viable. I'm a fan of that, right? It's the same as like Darius Jungle trying to exist. It's like, look, he's a top laner, but go for it. A fan, right? So 5 times more mist pickup down there. Totally about it. Next up is Trundle, who is getting some very, very light stat rounding. 0.6 mana, 0.28 health, 0.008 mana regen per 5 seconds. Not gonna math them. I'm glad the decimals are going away. Yeah, this could have been 280. Yeah, this could have been 615. I would like to see it, but who cares? It's not a big deal. Just happy that it happens. Another thumbs up for me. This has no material change in the champion's win rate. The part that matters is the 10% movement speed drop on the W. Now that the E has been buffed enough to make it be worth maxing second, Trundle players are leaving W for last. The pro build and the best solo queue build are leaving W for last. The highest win rate builds leave W for last, which means that this is going to be a very big nerf for a while. Here is Trundle's movement speed before and after the change. Worth noting, very high win rate jungler, definitely a very successful champion overall. This is just across all of his ranked games this patch in jungle, with a good skill order or not. And here's the move speed difference. It's pretty dank. He's got a nice 420. Blaze it for his movement speed, so he's going to blaze around the jungle a little bit less, I guess. That's the joke I should have made in the first place. I'm less subtle than I could have been. But yeah, an 8% overall move speed drop is going to be felt. Absolutely. Ganks less well, chases less well, runs away from chickens to red buff less quickly and loses a quarter second doing that. Again, a very, very late game on Trundle, which is unrealistically reached. You're here. I don't really expect us to see the skill order change on this kit. Technically, yes, max rank W is better than old max rank W. Even if you were maxing W second, this would still be a nerf. You should definitely not max it first, but if you were maxing it first, this is maybe a buff, but probably not. Again, don't max it first. Yeah, I mean, 8% move speed for almost the entire game. In the, 1/3 of times where he's on his W, 1/4, whatever, where it matters, you're not just like AFK and brush. Yeah, I'll call it like a 1% win rate drop. Want to point out as well, by the way, Trundle is the #1 jungler in pro play right now. He is the go-to. He is very strong. He is great. Yeah, I think it's good on Riot to have nerfed him. This guy was nerfed after spring playoffs as well. The ulti cooldown was brought down a peg, and it didn't really matter. He still was the #1 jungler afterwards. Next up, Varus getting a very small attack damage scaling nerf. This, by the way, right, keep in mind you level up 17 times during a game, so this is about 2 attack damage. It's 1.87 at max rank, I guess. At max level, it's not a big deal. It's less than 2 AD, and obviously it's 0 at level 1, 0 difference. But the bigger one is the total attack damage ratio on his Q. And again, I want to point out Q is a total attack damage ratio, so a change here not only affects his scaling, but the base damage as well, and that makes this really important. So Varus' win rate is not absurd in solo queue. About 80% of Varus games, it's about right, 80% are lethality Varus, about 20% are on-hit Varus. On-hit Varus is definitively the weaker build, by about a 2% win rate difference. So part of this, right, is that this win rate is slightly diminished by 20% of his builds being suboptimal. Now, there's plenty of champions who also have this going on, by the way, right? Varus is not unique in that not all players are playing well. I've brought this up with things like Kayn skill orders and Bard skill orders and other kinds of things. Like, all champions have deflated win rates and also inflated win rates by people playing champions improperly. You know, if you max the wrong skill on Varus or you build the wrong item on Varus, you are weaker than Varus could have been, thus diminishing his win rate. But at the same time, 20% of the time, Xayah is against the bad skill order Varus and thus has a higher win rate against him. So this tends to average out unless you're in a specific situation where the people are really, really building the champion incorrectly. My default example, because the data was the most stark here, was Draven, where everyone is spamming lifesteal items on Draven, but his higher win rate builds are crit builds. It's, you know, Infinity Edge Stormrazor, or Stormrazor Infinity Edge, I forget which one, but they were substantially higher win rate than Bloodthirster, despite costing the same amount of gold and coming online at the same amount of time. Because Bloodthirster is not a very good first item. You're paying for a shield that's very, very low at early levels, for example. We're getting off topic. The point is, at the end of the day, people were building Varus improperly some of the time, and a lot of the time they're building him correctly. Also, in general, Varus is overtuned very, very slightly. Now, I would say that 51% is not the kind of win rate you need to nerf the champion. Again, I want to kind of point out that because on-hit build is only 20% of the time, it wasn't lowering his win rate that much. It was a 2% win rate drop, only 20% of the time. That's, you know, not, it's like a 0.4% win rate difference, right? Like 51.7 is also not abusive, right? So not a huge problem. Ultimately, is what I'm trying to say, is that Varus was not, by solo queue win rate, a broken champion. Strong, but not broken. Again, strong, though. In pro play, though, Varus is the #1 champion in the game. He is the #1 pro play champion. Varus is the only champion I can think of that has an over 100% pick ban rate in pro. Because the mid-season cup had blind pick as part of it, and there is a double Varus game. So Varus was picked and banned more times than there were games played in that tournament. Can't think of another example. If that doesn't tell you the champ is OP, nothing else will. So yes, Varus gets a nerf. So now we're on to the actual meat of the changes, now that we're here, and I've rambled for long enough. Yeah, the ability does have a base damage that scales with rank up. The base damage is 15 at level 1, by the way, which is why this nerf is so big early game and less big late game. But yeah, I mean, this is the damage of a full charged Q, and it's 10 damage less at level 1, and it's a solid 20 damage less at level 18. This, by the way, is counting his total attack damage difference. His total AD is like 2% lower. And keep in mind, like, a late game Varus gets to like 400 AD on a full build, so, you know, 2 less than 400 AD is obviously not massive, but, you know, it's still, you know, 2 to 1% less AD, which even to a little bit matters to his on-hit builds, but not terribly so. Regardless, though, this is the base damage difference, and then the actual ratio itself, of course, down by 9%. So the very, very late game Varus, you know, has 5% less base damage and then 9% less bonus AD scaling for a pretty substantial Q damage nerf. This is a nerf that is, in my mind, slightly bigger than the Akali Q got buffed. So I would kind of anticipate that Varus loses about the same amount of win rate as Akali gained. That would make sense to me. Now, there's probably some wiggle room both ways, right? Varus has arguably an easier follow-up pattern in that, he's got blight stacks, he's got the hard crowd control with the R, his E is still very good with AD builds. I don't think this is ever going to, the on-hit build's not going to overtake this, at least not yet. And even the on-hit build loses some damage here because they just have base AD. But yeah, I think Varus gets pretty close to about 50% off this build. That's probably where he lands. This should drop him from the number 1 spot. I think definitely. I think this nerf is big enough to drop Varus from the number 1 spot, but completely still a viable champion. Viktor gets about a 10% increase on the Q zap damage ratio, and also a pretty meaningful 1/3 AP ratio increase on the shield. I think this is actually a good place to target a buff, right? Viktor is an interesting mage where he actually gets to follow up with auto attacks and play a bit more close range. I think that's all really cool stuff. So it's cool to see buffs here. Also want to point out, I'm glad the buffs are on the ratio and not the base damage, because tank Viktor was an absolute terror in top lane. And hey, good on Riot to find the numbers that managed to push Viktor off of tank top as the build. Cool stuff. I mean, that was a big deal in 2018 Worlds. By the end of that, people had found out that top tank Viktor was absurd, and there just weren't, couldn't really be handled. It was just a very good champion. Licorice got super bodied by it and tried to learn an echo counter. It didn't work. Rip Licorice. Happens, I guess. But yeah, I'm glad that's the AP ratios. Keep in mind that AP ratios for Viktor are essentially base damages as well, because he gets free AP in the kit, right? The Hex Core exists. You try to mark the Hex Core as soon as possible. Viktor tends to be a solo laner, thus he gains quite a bit of levels and thus has the AP. So even if you aren't doing super duper well, this will at least have a baseline value, which is kind of cool. And ultimately, yes, this is a small, 1%, maybe 0.5% win rate buff to Viktor. Which is cool, and again, I think it's in a good spot. It's aimed well. So here is Volibear. Volibear is getting mana growth, health growth, some visual updates. The Eternals are live. Okay, so mana growth by 10, health growth by 5, some bug fixes and stuff. These are all fairly minor. I read through them. You can read them at your own leisure. A early game bump to the turret disable duration, but a late game nerf. Early game bump to base damage on the R, and a bigger radius on the epicenter. Okay, so let's talk about what this means overall. Well, he seems to have stabilized at about 47% win rate in top lane, is what I was seeing over the last 3 to 4 days in solo queue. There's still more growth to be had probably over time, but it's slowing down somewhat. 47% is not abysmal, but certainly this is the kind of champion that should probably sit pretty close to 50. It seems like juggernauts don't really get to sit far above 50 because they tend to be frustrating when ahead, just because you can't really kill them. You just kind of stat check top lane. If they're doing well in team fights, you just kind of don't kill them back. So this is probably a class that lives about 50%. Maybe it lives slightly above 50. So yeah, I think Volibear landing at 51 would be a pretty good spot for him long term when people learn the champion well. I think that would be reasonable. So here is the mana growth before and after, and I'm a little sad that it's going up to 1200 max mana. I honestly would have liked to see this stay at 1000. I still like to see that. I don't think there's a really reason to forsake that, and yeah, maybe his scaling mana cost could have come down slightly, but it doesn't matter that much. It's a really minor pipe dream. It's just not that terribly important. This just allows you to have, some, it's a one-line change where you type in one different digit and you go, okay, his late game's better. It's fine. He's got better mana constraints. As far as health growth is concerned, Volibear had very, very low health for a Juggernaut. I mean, 2025 is absurdly low for his class. Yes, he gets a bunch of flat health off the ultimate. He gets that self-shield off of the Thunderstorm that he walks into, and that scales off max health itself. So I understand the wanting to be a little conservative on the health pool, but it still feels a little weird to have the base health be that low. Like, even 580 is not that high for a melee champion. There's plenty of other Juggernauts with a lot more base health than him. So I feel it's a little weird that he has slightly deflated base stats, especially for a rework, right? Like, base stats are like the time, like a new release and a new rework are like the time to have inflated base stats. I mean, I think you're especially kind of sabotaging yourself if you release a champion knowing they have substandard base stats. Because, like, regardless of how good you are at the champion, and everyone's bad because it's game one, at least you have a base attack damage and base health to just, like, right-click and win a little bit, which is still what a Juggernaut does in the first place. So, a little weird to see this. It's getting buffed to a more normal spot. I wouldn't have minded seeing 600 flat HP as well here, and you know, another buff at level 1. It's again, it's a really, really minor thing. It's not a huge deal. And at the end of the day, like, the first 5 levels are mostly untouched, right? This is not a ton of extra stats in the early game, so his early laning is not much better. To be fair, also his early laning is probably quite strong, but whatever. Next, we have the ultimate changes, right? The disable is longer in the early game, the same in the mid game, and a little bit shorter in the late game. I actually like flattening this. I think this is actually a good change. In general, I don't like duration scaling because I think it hurts the learnability of these kinds of abilities. It's like, okay, I'm against Volibear and I have learned that he turns off towers, right? Okay, good to know. How long's the turret gone for? Well, the duration triples based on game time. Like, that is incredibly hard to learn. You'd have to, like, go play the champion and read the tooltip or look him up on a wiki. I am definitely not a fan of that tripling. But, oh, you know, 3 to 5 is to me much less egregious than 2 to 6. Like, as kind of like a design shape. Now, this actually might just make sense overall. Like, look, like, disabling turrets for more than 3 seconds in the early game is just not tenable for gameplay toxicity. And, like, in the late game, dives take longer, so you need more than, 3 seconds for a late game dive. Like, I buy that, right? Like, I can, like, not like duration scaling, but also recognize that there are gameplay reasons to have it anyway, and that's fine. Like, not all changes are zero sum. Some changes are like, well, it's a little bit unfortunate here, but it's way better for this reason, and thus it's positive, so we're gonna make the change. Like, that's fine, right? It's Yasuo exists. And I'm sure lots of people are upset that they have to lane against Yasuo. But Yasuo has more playtime than most games. Like, other boxed products games have less playtime than Yasuo does, just as his microcosm of League of Legends. Like, Yasuo is not a zero-sum champion. He has brought more joy to the game than despair. And much like this Volibear R scaling can absolutely bring more, like, positive gameplay impacts than negative difficulty of learning impact. So, not saying it's a bad change, not saying it's a bad design thing to have it, just, yeah, unlucky that it has to scale. As far as the R damage goes up a fair bit, pretty interesting. Things like almost tripled in damage. That the base damage is very, very low at low ranks, then, pretty monstrously high at high ranks. It's actually fairly, reasonable now at early ranks and scales up here. This and also the next change here to Xayah. I'm actually a really big fan. Actually, here's the weird thing. So I'll wait till we're done with Xayah and then I'll go into it. I am, in general, to a certain extent, a fan of ultimates having really good base damages and not a ton of scaling. And we'll talk about that later in a little bit. So this, anyway, puts it up to a pretty reasonable amount of base damage, where I think, in general, ults... should ults really triple in damage? Let's do a comparison real quick, right? So, like, a level 6 Volibear has 900 health, and a level 18 Volibear has 200 health. This is actually a fairly reasonable health scaling for a champion to have. So, what it means is that roughly between rank 1 and rank 3 of the ultimate, in fact, we can do level 6 to level 8, level 6 to level 16. Between rank 1 and rank 3 of an ultimate, a champion roughly doubles in health. Now, they also gain armor, and they also gain MR, so they more than double. They probably don't triple. Like, you would have to gain 50 armor into MR to, add half, to add enough that you would triple at that point. But you at least double the base health, and we'll call it, 250%. You have about 250% as much durability when you learn a rank 3 ultimate as when you learn a rank 1 ultimate. That's roughly true for most champions. Just like a little thing to keep in the back of your head. That's roughly true for most champions. Which means I think it's okay if ultimates deal about 2.5 times as much damage at rank 3 as rank 1. Because it sort of keeps up with generic champion durability growth. Now, physical durability grows faster than magic durability. So maybe physical damage spells need to grow more than magic damage ultimates do. But at the same time, it can also be a little bit harder to itemize raw attack damage than it is to itemize raw AP, right? Death Cap exists, and okay, so does Lord Dominic's, but it's not like Void Staff's not there anyway, right? Like, the armor and magic pen stuff aren't any different, and also here I am ranting about the ultimate, so it doesn't wait. I'm not waiting anymore. But we have the numbers here, so I'm going to use it. So it's interesting, right? Because, in the real game, armor grows more than MR, but AP grows more than AD. Volibear has to stop and go get Dead Man's Plate and Righteous Glory and whatever else, and has to stop building attack damage, after his Triforce or Cleaver or whatever, or maybe Sterex or something, but has to stop eventually. Has to stop building AD, whereas Echo doesn't. Echo never stops building ability power items. Even his tank items are, Zonia's and Protobelt and Banshee's Veil and, Riley's if you have to, Morales' health on it. Like, you can actually build hybrid durability, Errata of Ages, etc. They all have AP on them. Yes, there are hybrid Juggernaut items, but at a certain point, after Sterex, you're just building Dead Man's Plate, which is just health and armor. Minor thing there, but hey, a thing. Okay, so moving on. What does this mean? Well, it's still, 2 1/3 times as much damage versus 2 and almost 3 times as much damage. I mean, the scaling is about the same, honestly. But this is, I think, roughly the kind of scaling you expect out of an ultimate, right? Is that it scales up to about, hey, look, 1/3 of his max health, and it starts at, hey, look, about 1/3 of his max health. Works out okay. So now we go on to Xayah. Let's move on finally into Xayah, who has been a dominant pro play champion for a long time, as we have seen, but really is in a weak spot right now. I think her armor got nerfed a bunch. Her W attack speed got nerfed a fair bit. She's overall in a weaker spot. And thus, yeah, Xayah is probably the weakest marksman in the game right now, is my vote. I think she's last place. Of the conventional bot lane marksman, is probably the single weakest one. That's my opinion. So totally fair to see her get buffed. Now, I do want to say that I think marksman balance is very, very good right now. Like, yes, Varus is too good. But I think there are a lot of viable marksmen right now. I think Sivir feels pretty bad because of the recent W nerf, but she still scales well. And she's still, successful. It's not that big of a deal. But I think Xayah is the worst one. And so here we have a big ulti damage buff, right? And the old base damage was 1 to 200, and now it fully triples based on thing here. Now, I want to point out, though, that there is some hidden damage in this ability. So obviously, here's the scaling, 25% higher at rank 1, 88% higher at rank 3. That's a really big deal, right? And yes, and I'm, by the way, very glad that this ability scales this aggressively, because there's something I want to point out here, is that this ability has scaling on it, essentially scaling on it, that is not damage, right? So one is she just becomes untargetable. So you could, dodge Mystic Shots or Ashe arrows or Viktor ultis or Malphite ultis, which is a really big deal, right? And that just kind of scales by itself. It just is a power. Yeah, the CD goes down so you can dodge more often, but right, the offensive power doesn't really scale, right? Like, what I'm trying to say is the power budget of this ability isn't really scaling directly with rank, right? But I think there's value in your ability scaling aggressively with rank so that if you're ahead, it feels like you're ahead, right? Gaining 100 damage on rank 3 of the ultimate doesn't really scale you by getting ahead. This is one of the things that I talked about maybe 2 years ago, maybe a year ago or something, when it'd been like, hey, how would I change marksman to make them feel better? And it was giving them way more spell base damages that they could feel successful off of simply leveling up. That if you took some solo farm, you actually got some meaningful skill rank ups that you cared about. And that if you were ahead, it really felt like you were ahead and you could really push things over instead of, well, but Malphite stunned me, so I died anyway. And so I'm a really big fan of a bit more aggressive base damages on these marksmen. Also want to point out that, okay, yeah, if you were ahead of the curve and you're leveling and you're doing well with your ultimate, hey, you hit rank through the ulti, you're going to hit someone really hard, cool, whatever. What aggressively scaling ultimates does even more so, this is actually the primary thing, and this is actually the primary point I wanted to make in this sort of ramble, is that I think ultimates are the single best anti-snowball tool in League of Legends. These are things that you only really use when there is a big fight. And the way they're built out, and I think correctly so, is ultis tend to have way higher base damages than ratios. Every single champion basically is an example of this. Pick your favorite champion, compare the ulti, base damage to ratio to like their Q base damage to ratio, and it's not close. But what's interesting about this is this means that if we're between level 11 and 15, which is absurd snowballing, don't get me wrong. Like, this guy is so much more powerful than this guy by being 15 to 11. But he has the same power of ultimate, right? You both have a 300 damage, 2-second knock-up Malphite ulti, and it's probably like 1.5 in Malphite, but whatever. You have the exact same ultimate for 4 levels. And if the ultimate is a fairly large portion of your power budget, it doesn't matter how much gold you have, and it doesn't matter what level you are, within reason, you have the exact same Malphite ulti as the other guy. That is a great equalizer, where both these ultis can smack a Kaisa and allow the team to follow up. That is a good thing. It is a good thing when, Xayah, whether you're level 11 or level 15, has actually meaningful damage where the feathers fly, deal 250, and then you get the pullback on the E, which, has a base damage on it, right? It's already max rank, it already does enough damage to matter, and bam, no matter what, I get 500 damage out of my RE combo, so I can follow up that Malphite even if I have no gold, right? It's why I like total AD ratio scaling, because it lets the ability keep being a little bit more useful, instead of just bonus AD ratio, which then only scales off of item purchases, because then to circle back, one thing that champions get almost no matter how much they're getting screwed is experience. I have seen games where I have twice the gold of the enemy AD carry because I had an amazingly good game and I absolutely popped off, and I had 20k gold and that guy had 11k gold. It's the 1 in 1,000 games where I'm like, yep, I am the 15 kill Tristana, I am the 1v9. I have 20k gold, they have 11k gold. That was my last Clash game, was actually that. And we just had a zillion robbing me. It was great. It was wonderful. It was a lot of fun. But what I didn't have was 7 levels on the guy, right? They can at least gain experience. And so being able to at least gain XP and limp into the game and still be in the running to do stuff is the great equalizer, which means having an ultimate with a good base damage, having normal abilities with decent base damages. Normal abilities should probably scale with AD and AP, and that's how you get to snowball, because an ahead Viktor should feel better than a behind Viktor, and your E and Q doing a bunch of damage is how you do that, and absolutely totally on board for that. But I think saying, okay, well, look, we're behind, let's play around our ultimates is a great rallying cry. And if the ultimates are impactful, even without farm, I think that is a great design lever. Cool stuff. Fan. So I really like seeing this. The one other thing I want to point out, by the way, is that this ability has a hidden base damage on it, which is that after you press R, you then press E. Right? You then have the feathers on the ground, and then you blade collar them back. That has a base damage. That has an AD ratio, and the number of feathers dropped here, by the way, doesn't scale. Like, I wouldn't mind seeing this scale, like, +1 feather per rank or something. Which, like, is just more base damage, but in a different way. Like, it's maybe even not correct to do it this way. I'm not really sure. But, like, a possibility, right? Maybe. Something to think about. Something I think is interesting. I didn't do the math on like what a 7 feather pullback would be here for this to like further change the base damage, but I want to say that I am glad this base damage is going up. This is probably just shy of a 1% win rate bump. I mean, 100, getting 25, 100, and 175 damage on the ultimate is nice. Again, very happy this buff is happening, but it's an ulti that doesn't always hit the target. I'll say just sub 1%, but Xayah will get pretty close to 50% win rate off this change, which I'm pretty happy about. All right, a few more changes coming up. We've got Yasuo. Yasuo is losing 33 flat health, but gaining 15 flat shield, which recharges, of course, over time. And then also, the Wind Wall is going to be 4 seconds longer at rank 1, and the same cooldown at max rank. Now, cooldown, not duration, obviously. So here is Yasuo's table of win rates. He is a slightly weak top laner, a pretty good mid laner, and a slightly overtuned bot laner, right? This is a bit strong. And it's kind of unsurprising that Yasuo tends to be good against ranged champions, right? He's got Wind Wall. It does roughly nothing to Aurelia. I believe it can stop her E, but that's it. I guess it stops her R as well. Okay, so there's things, but It does literally nothing against Darius. It does, yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of melee-only champions where it has no impact, right? There's no play on wind wall whatsoever. So wind wall is a very easy balancing lever to say, okay, well, how can we make it good for that versus the other thing? Also want to point out the balancing levers here as we go through the numbers, and then we'll talk about I'll ramble for a second. So the health drop, yep, sure. Also going below 2k health, pretty shocking for a melee champion. Obviously a 500-point shield means he actually has like 2,500 health, which is very high. Right? Yasuo's like all-in durability is the highest base health in the game. If you use the entire shield, this is the highest base health in the game, and it's not close. At level 1, it was 623, among the highest as well. Now it's 605, which is reasonable for a melee champion. So, lower health, higher shield. Combined total, by the way, is still lower. Obviously, 33 is always more than 15. But the amount it matters obviously shrinks down over time. Now, things I want to bring up, okay? If you're only ever doing one all-in, this is a nerf, right? The combined total durability is obviously weaker. If you're doing several medium duration trades where you are using the whole shield, well, once you've used the shield twice, it's as good as flat health, right? It's as good as flat health. You've now gotten 30 back, and you got nerfed by 33. 3 health is not a balance change. If you use a shield the third time before recalling and resetting all, game states, it's now a buff. Now, in Yasuo versus Jax, you bet you're using your shield more than 3 times in a laning phase between recalls. I mean, unless you're so far ahead that it doesn't matter anymore, or you're so far behind it doesn't matter anymore. If you're playing the lane reasonably close against a Renekton, you're using your shield more than 3 times in the laning phase. Or I should say, specifically, more than 3 times between recalls, right? Recall flattens everything, and you could ignore whatever else happened. So, yes. In a situation where you use your shield at least 3 times between recalls, big deal. Now, here's the caveat. If you don't use all the shield, this isn't a buff. Like, if I'm Sivir, and I'm against Yasuo, and I ricochet through the wave, and I deal 23 damage to you with ricochet, I have popped your shield. And this buff means absolutely nothing. This nerf still matters. You still have 33 less health, you don't have 15 more shield. And every time I can poke your shield off for free, the more this happens, right? A rank 3 brand W does, I would say overall, less than 211 damage. It probably does less than 196. So even if you're, playing bot lane against Brand and he lands Pillar of Flame on you, well, you've got some MR. You probably ran a stat shard for it because you knew you were against Brand support. This probably doesn't one-shot your shield. And so even that buff doesn't matter, where, you're taking a rank 3 fairly high damage spell and it's still not a buff. It still got poked off and you still have 33 less health. So the pokier the matchup is, the less this helps Yasuo. If it's a full all-in 1v1, that's just like, yep, we're going to kill you and you're going to die to this 1v1, then, okay, once again, it's not a buff. But if you are playing several trades, if you're getting your ulti off in a team fight, which refreshes your shield, we're back to being flat, right? We're back to getting 30 shield back versus losing 33 health, assuming you can use up both shields fully. And if you ever get a third shield, you're back there. So team fighting Yasuo, fairly flat. Top lane Yasuo, power up. Bot lane and mid Yasuo, maybe power neutral to a slight nerf. Obviously, the wind wall cooldown is the bigger one. A 4-second cooldown on wind wall is a really big deal, because if I'm forcing you to use it on cooldown every single wave, it will eventually slow down to the point where it's not up for that wave, right? Like, I mean, if you're literally using it on cooldown and you're jamming W, then yes, it's up once per wave like clockwork every single time. But that means that, if the lane's pushing towards me, you're wind walling later. It's pushing back towards you, wind wall's not back yet, right? And these 4 seconds of give were actually pretty relevant, which now you're able to play around. All right, we're gonna end this out. We've got a couple of quick rune changes, then we're good. So approach velocity. I'm gonna quickly TLDR it. Basically, there's no longer a max range cap of 1,000 on champs at UFCC, which means if you're playing Jhin or Ashe or anyone else with long range counter control, you can still follow up your own approach velocity because it's still the 50% move speed, but now you can do it from across the map. Cool beans. Good stuff. The next big thing is you gain movement speed when someone else does it at 7.5%. That is probably still going to have the 1,000 range cap on it, so you're not running around the map just because, like, Darius slowed the top laner. But this is a substantial buff to approach velocity if you're in a crowd control heavy team, and especially if you're playing kind of a mid-range champion. Like, I mean, just getting to run faster as Singed when the Orianna lands dissonance on them is really, really, really nice. This is a big deal on so many champions. This is 7.5% move speed in a lot of team fights. It's a really big deal. This is a very, very big buff. This is mostly flat in kind of all cases. There's a few where it matters, but you can mostly ignore it. This is a big deal. This is a lot of time you're going to get this buff. I do want to point out, actually, by the way, toward allies or enemies you've impaired. Yeah, toward impaired allies or enemies you've impaired is movement speed towards a movement impaired enemy. Right, okay, sorry. So slightly misread this initially. You no longer run towards your teammates, which, to be fair, very rarely, I think, actually mattered. So I don't think you're going to really miss this very much. I think it's fine. But you now get 7.5% towards any impaired enemy champion, which is nice. Next up is Guardian. You no longer have to quite as aggressively buff your adjacent teammate to get the shield. There's just a bit more room to just get them by being near them. Big fan of that change for usability. The damage is now no longer poked off by a rank 1 Sivir W. It has to be enough to matter. Either, better be lethal or a bunch of damage ticking up. If you've taken 90 damage over 2.5 seconds, it will finally show up. The shielding is bigger. It doesn't give move speed, which honestly is fine. This was kind of cool. There was some gameplay around it, but it was because you couldn't control when Guardian popped, it just tended to happen. And so I'm glad this is gone because it was just kind of weird. Is this a nerf overall to the ability? It's hard to say. So here is the shield amount. It is up 14 to 33%, which is pretty reasonable. Not a bad thing at all. It pops for stupid things less often, which I'm happy about. Right, shields more intelligently, shields more easily. Doesn't give move speed conditionally. In general, I like the change design-wise. Power up versus power down, it's kind of hard to say. I'm going to suggest that it's power... I actually want to say power down. Because I think this is actually, like... Even though I don't like it, I think this is very, very good. This has ended up mattering a lot. Even though you never really noticed. Like, you could notice it, certainly. There's just do weird stuff where, like, oh, we just ran away from the gank because you hit us once. Like, Jarvan threw a flag, popped Guardian, and now we walked away from the knockup. Guess we're good now, right? Like, that kind of stuff happened. Alrighty, next up, Predator changes. All right, so Predator actually needed sight on its prey. It had some weird stuff going on. We're trying to broaden its role and make it more of an option for non-junglers. So the cooldown is down by 50 to 30 seconds. The damage is down by roughly half. The active is available from the very start of the game, so you can buy boots level 1 in Predator. Don't do this on Blitzcrank. Don't forsake your support item just to get Predator boots. Don't do it. Obviously not okay on junglers either. Now junglers, for what it's worth, like, also aren't going to start boots, so this doesn't matter for them. This is only really a thing on top mid bot. Those are the only 3 roles that can realistically potentially start boots. And I don't expect any of them to actually do it. They might, but I don't expect this to happen. All right, so now that once you're done channeling, you get 45 move speed while running towards enemy champions at 3,000 range, even once you can't see. This does theoretically let you map hack. There is some gameplay around this. This does allow some level of map hacking. That is a thing. That is relevant. This can matter. Yeah. That's worth considering. But the cool stuff is you can press the active, essentially in combat. You can just be like, yep, it's time to Predator. Like, I'm singed. I'm running at this guy. Let's go. And I'm just going to press his button. Like, this is now a great singed rune because Predator now only deals damage and ends when you hit enemy champions. So now you can just pop Predator on Singed at a 1.5 minute cooldown and just run at the dude with Poison Trail on. You can hit minions and it doesn't matter. You still get it off. This is such a big deal. This is such a huge rework to how the ability can be used. You don't lose it by hitting a minion with something. You don't lose it by someone tagging you with damage or pressing a spell while you're powering up. You can use this in combat. You have to wait till it turns on. It still has the 1.5 second cast time. But oh my, this is great. And there's a lot of move speed. 45% is very, very good. This is quick, right? This is quick, and it doesn't turn off because you tagged a minion with Poison Trail or whatever. Sunfire Cape, Cinderhulk, who cares? Very, 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 very big deal. Absolutely massive. It's going to be really fun. So here's the data table. Here is the cooldown before and after, buffed by about 1/3. Here's the damage before and after. It is half the base damage, half the AD ratio, and 40% of the AP ratio. So it's half the damage, but it's usable. I mean, let's be clear, right? Like, this damage to minions didn't matter. It's now going to not damage minions. It's going to only damage champions. So it's usable. Like, it's doing half the damage, but it's hitting enemy champions, I would say, half as often. So it's kind of doing the same total damage to champions anyway, but just is better. This is hugely awesome, hugely good. Taste of Blood has a nice little icon stuff. That's great. Unflinching is now just 10 to 30% tenacity and slow resist based on missing health. Cool. Instead of it being 0 to theoretically 50, I guess, if all of your spells were just used recently. I am happy this is more simplified. I'm a big fan of this, right? Like, I think this is a good design change. I'm glad it's happening. I think the weird, like, summoner spell hookup was just odd. I'm just kind of glad. Obviously, Unflinching plus Legend Tenacity is quite good together. I'm not sure if it's like necessarily strictly a buff. I'm not certain. I mean, how often was exactly one summoner spell on cooldown? I don't know. But that would be what this is. And then you gain another 20% more of the time, which, like, yeah, if both summoners were on cooldown at all times, you had a constant 20 instead of a 10 to 30. That said, tenacity is not useful always when you're full HP because you're generally just not in combat. I don't know. It's fairly power neutral. I'm sure it's going to go one way or the other, but it's hard for me to judge. Ultimately, I'm happy about this change. I think it's a design win. I'm happy about it. Ghost now activates full speed instantly, gets increased duration over time as you get takedowns. Also, move speed a little bit lower, but doesn't have to ramp up, which means, theoretically could be more total distance traveled. But the cooldown is worse, and the move speed top end is slightly weaker as well. And here is Ghost as a result. So this is assuming you had 325 base move speed. This is your old, this is your new at max speed. And yeah, you're, 6 to 3% less fast, which, is not trivial. But I mean, it's still a decent amount of move speed, to be fair. It's not, again, it's a much bigger nerf in the early game, but not terrible. Cooldown is longer as well, right? So, Ghost is in and of itself arguably weaker. Although, to be fair, how often did you need the last 3 seconds of Ghost versus how much did you need the first 2 seconds to be fast? It turning on right away may be more important. There is a way to do some a more advanced table here and actually say, like, distance traveled by second, and that could have been done. I didn't do it. I could have. Sorry. But the big thing is, look at actually how much of the duration you're getting on kills and assists, right? You're getting 4 to 7 seconds on, by the way, a 10-second long summoner spell, as you gain time. This is actually pretty meaningful, right? So suddenly, the cooldown nerf, the move speed nerf, if you're getting kills or assists during this thing, means you're getting more total movement speed per game time, like grand game time, out of this buff, right? So it turns on earlier, and it lasts longer at a slightly more mellow pace, but this feels like a buff. This feels really good. You're really gonna feel that. This is the part that really matters. This is the nerf that really bricked the summoner spell, and so I'm glad that it's happening. Unfortunately, no time for a TLDR. I actually have stuff to do today. I know it doesn't take all that long to do, but I've got to go. Thank you all for watching the video. Thank you all for tuning in. I'll see you next time.